Hi everyone, welcome to the Captain's Podcast. And today I have a very special guest on the podcast joining from the US, Dr. Anoop Kumar. Dr. Anoop is a board certified in emergency medicine and he holds even a management degree. And he's author of two great books, which I highly recommend: Michelangelo's Medicine and Is This a Dream? He encourages people to rethink consciousness and have very different perspective and very inclusive perspective towards modern medicine and the ancient philosophy of medicine like we see in Ayurveda and Chinese medicines and others. Make sure you like, share, and comment on this episode. How do you find it? Let me know your views and let's jump in. Hey, Dr. Noop, thanks so much for doing this. And how are you?
I'm doing great this morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Where are you based in the US?
I am in Northern Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C.
Okay, so how's the weather there?
It's warming up. It's spring.
Okay,
So we're kind of getting some cold, some warm, back and forth at this time.
that's great. It's getting hot as hell in here in India. I don't know what happened, but in March and now in April, we have never seen such a hot weather. I
Oh,
mean,
really?
in previous few days, a few years, and now it is getting hotter by the day. We are already at 40 plus degrees Celsius, and getting hotter by the day. So the podcast, basically, I just wanted to, I mean, I went through your profile, I saw your books, I saw your videos. You are doing some amazing work in health, and I have been always curious about getting to know people who are doing such a different set of things in basically the health part of it. And you take things from ancient mythology, you can say, or maybe the ancient learnings we kind of have forgotten over a period of time. In India, we see people are not, I mean, they are more inclined towards the new medicine, allopathy, and all. And but recently, in recent years, we have seen the resurgence and renewed interest in old forms of medicine and healing technologies that were used earlier, and the learnings that we had in our ancestors used to treat things differently, and you kind of present it in a very easy to understand for a layman format. So how did this come about?
Well, I think all of us as children have a very simple way of seeing the world. And I would suggest simple and comprehensive way of
Yeah,
looking at the world. And by that, I mean that we have not yet developed concepts that divide us from the world that we're in, or that divide the world into different kinds of experiences. This is the scientific world. This is the mythological world. This is the religious world. This is the spiritual world. This is the philosophical world, right? These are
yeah,
all adult divisions. These are divisions in the adult mind that we superimpose on the world. So children don't necessarily have these divisions, and there is a simplicity and inclusivity and comprehensiveness in their vision and their experience of living. Now, what happens is as we get educated, we learn that a particular kind of thinking is science, a particular kind of thinking is spirituality, a particular kind of thinking is philosophical, and so on. And then we tend to specialize in one area. And so what happens is we put up these walls in our minds, and then we follow that hallway through what we call our professional career. And then we become specialists in a particular area and eventually come to realize that deeper knowledge requires taking down these walls, right? So I'm saying this because everyone can recognize this in their own experience from the time they were children and learned to build walls within themselves to where they are now. So in my case, as a child, I had the same experience that everyone else did. I was also fortunate that I was exposed to Advaita Vedanta very early in my life. So for me, it was the same experience as a child, but I was fortunate in that I was exposed to the Indian philosophy of Advaita Vedanta, right? Which essentially says that our fundamental nature and the fundamental nature of the universe is the same, right?
Right.
That differences are at a particular level of reality, and there is a deeper level of reality where there's connectedness, and even beyond that to oneness and non-difference. So, as a child, when you hear this, and when you start to play with this and experiment with this, you also have a choice to not build up all those walls that the educational system and all the adults and everybody around is talking about,
Yeah.
right? You can in a sense put up transparent walls in the sense that you can understand what people are talking about, that this is math, this is geology, this is
Right.
music, that is art. You can still create those walls, but they're transparent and you can see them as not fundamental but functional and value based and depending on the situation at hand. So I think because of that, I was always experimenting with walls and boundaries and if they're necessary and what they're like. And that's what ultimately led to this kind of view, a different view of life and a different view of what health is, which is that there is this underlying connectedness, completeness, wholeness from which health and healing stem.
Great. You studied emergency medicine when you became a doctor, and uh, for me, I mean, the exposure that I have of an ER doctor is from the American shows like Grey's Anatomy and House, and now I'm binging on this show called Good Doctor. So
Mhm.
did that shape you to understand the levels of stress? And I think the trauma and everything has is always around for a ER doctor, and uh, and the learnings that you had in your college and while studying were all inclined towards this understanding how to treat quickly and handle stress and all that. So all this culminated into uh, you what I'm essentially trying to ask is if all this led to the Dr. Anoop that we see today, and from the ancient learnings and the mixture of the new techniques and modern medicines, as we call it, uh, and the experience that shaped while you were practicing, all that has culminated into your whatever you are preaching right now is a mixture of that, or is it solely based on the ancient learning?
No, it's certainly a mix. I would say everything influences what I say today, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely everything. The emergency medicine piece is crucial because that's where we can bring these views together, right? A view that is thought of as philosophy and spirituality, along with a view that is thought of as scientific. Now, I would challenge those categories for anybody who's thinking that way and just see that what we're calling scientific is simply, generally speaking, an investigation of the external world to learn more about ourselves, right? That's what we call the objective path of study. And what is generally called spirituality is looking at ourselves and our own experience first to understand what we are and what this world is. So these are two paths that the very same mind takes to try to understand what's going on. It's a very simple thing that we're doing. It's a human creature tendency. We want to know what's going on and we want to try to modify it so that we can live well. And these are different paths that we take. So both paths are necessary. We can say one is the path of emergency medicine and one
Yeah.
is the path of subjective introspection and experimentation. But both are necessary, and both are necessary in all areas. When you're in the ER and a patient comes in distress and they can't breathe, yes, we take the emergency medicine perspective to assess the airway, to assess their breathing, to see what has to happen next. But of course, you're taking the subjective perspective, right? You're experiencing that this person is in distress, right?
Right.
You're experiencing what their values are, how they want to proceed. You're experiencing what their relationships with their family are, right? There's no book for that, right?
Right.
There's no algorithm for that. There's no lab test for that. There's no CT scan for that. So experience is always fundamental. And that experience, which is human, which every child knows, is then modified into scientific ways of experiencing and so-called spiritual ways of experiencing. So both of these are critical today, but they're critical because they are what we are always doing, engaging the experience of ourselves and engaging the experience of the world. And the more we can integrate these and see what is common to both of these, the more complete our solutions will be in healthcare.
Great. So, has this made to the best of colleges? I mean, do you see in the curriculum, I mean, the new doctors that are graduating today, are they being taught such things?
It's there in the form of what's called integrative medicine. So, integrative medicine is when we look at the different healing systems of the world, right? Allopathy, which is what I'm trained in, is one healing system. Then
Right.
there is, of course, Ayurveda in India.
Yeah.
There is Siddha, right? There is traditional Chinese medicine, and there's many different healing systems in the world.
Right.
So, of course, all healing systems deal with one subject, which is the human being. But
Right.
you'll see that today we cannot reconcile all these healing systems, right? We don't know how Siddha works. We can't explain it in terms of medicine, right? We don't necessarily know how Ayurveda works. We can't explain it. Why? Because each system comes from a different kind of mind, and each mind envisions what the human being is differently. And because of that, one mind from one system can't necessarily understand another one because the viewpoint of human anatomy itself is different. So at that level, it is not being taught in medical schools, in allopathic medical schools. But there is this idea that mind is important, right? We know
Right.
that because we know that from placebo studies that mind is a very powerful intervention. It's a very
Absolutely.
powerful aspect of what we are that's hanging out somewhere. It's nebulous. We don't define it. We don't necessarily understand it. It kind of scares us a little bit because it kind of threatens our expertise. If mind is that powerful and I don't know about it as a physician, then it's also a kind of threat to my expertise, right? So, for many reasons, we're not really digging into what this mind is, but we do understand it's important. There is integrative medicine, which suggests that there is much more that we do not know. Let us explore this. It is time to now formalize this exploration of mind and this connection with body in the curriculum, along with understanding the principles of all healing systems. And then we will have a more complete education, and we will see that our ability to help others heal will also increase.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree. Ultimate is aim is to become a healthy individual, and if we
Right.
can have some nuance that not a hard view like only allopathy works or only Ayurveda works. What if we have a mixture of all that is good, and that helps us become a better individual in terms of health or otherwise, and that would be great. And you talk
We
about
have the
mind.
mix. We
Yeah,
have the
sure.
mix right now, right? We have the mix in integrative medicine, but we need to go one step beyond just having a mix. We need to be able to relate one to the other.
Right.
We need to be able to understand one system in terms of the other system's understanding of anatomy and physiology. Because until then, it will just be, well, I practice allopathy. Some person over there does something
Yeah.
strange called Ayurveda, and let them, some
Right.
other person does something strange called traditional Chinese medicine. And that's wild because they have a totally different understanding, and it has nothing to do with allopathy. That's the idea.
Yeah.
Of course, that's only because we don't understand allopathy deeply enough, because we don't understand the philosophical assumptions on which we stand, right? The philosophical assumptions about mind being separate from body or mind not being necessary in addressing the body. These kinds of assumptions are the platform on which we stand. So, if we were to truly understand our own medicine, each of us in all healing systems, then we would see that the human being underneath all of this is the same. And we will be able to correlate all this and have a much deeper science. So we do have systems existing side by side, but now we need to go one level deeper.
Yeah. So that ultimately they complement each other. The goods of all the system come together and help us
Yeah.
lead a better life.
Just like
Great.
the right hand complements the left hand, right? We
Yeah,
wouldn't say that they're different. They're part of the same organism. So
right.
allopathy and Ayurveda and Chinese medicine are different functions of, we can say, the human system, right? They're
Right.
different approaches to the human system.
But I have not never seen a doctor who has studied allopathy is so arguing strongly about having a complementary system, because what I see is people are generally apprehensive of letting others try even different systems like homeopathy or others that we have in India. That's great to
It's
see. Yeah,
it's popular. It's pretty popular now. I mean, integrative medicine is really popular. People are recognizing that they want more of themselves to be seen, right?
right,
That's one way of saying it, that if you are trained in a physicalist perspective of human nature and a physical first perspective, and even worse, only a physical perspective, right? Such
right,
that the mind is generally not acknowledged. If you're trained in that way, then you will tend to frame people minimalistically, right? Not as human
right,
beings, but as professionals, right? So there's the human aspect of a physician, of course, and there's the professional aspect. And the professional aspect is the trained aspect of the human, right?
right,
So through the professional lens, if you have a physicalized view of anatomy and a physicalized view of physiology, now you have to physicalize the person in front of you. You have to kind of mechanize them. And that has its pros and it has its cons. And if you cannot go with your professional lens beyond the mechanized view, if you have to resort to only your human lens and you don't have a trained professional lens through which to see the whole person, there's always going to be this tension
right.
within the physician, because you have the human part and the professional part. And how do you bring them together unless you have an integrated view? So the way to do that is to, again, speak to our education and improve the curriculum to bring about a more complete model of human anatomy that describes not just the human body, but the human being as a whole.
Yeah, and I think that you have brilliantly covered. I mean, I have not read the book properly, but I've gone through the reviews and the summary. And in your book, the Michelangelo's Medicine, uh, how did that shape? I mean, from being a practicing doctor and now writing a book about, which is, I would say, goes against or maybe a different perspective of what you have studied.
Yeah, it doesn't go against what I've studied at all.
Yeah.
It completes the picture of what I've studied because it brings into view all the other life experiences that are already there, right? So that is a common misunderstanding today, that what we call science is at odds with this kind of subtler experience of life and the subtler experience of ourselves. But that again is due to the walls that we are given from the education, right? In
Right.
fact, any wall that you can build, naturally the materials come from somewhere and they come from our own
Uh,
experience. So
right.
all the walls are within our own experience. So that book came about. Actually, I wrote about it in the book, in the introduction. I wrote
Right.
about how this came about and why I'm doing this. And essentially it came from this place where I got to a point in my training where I said something else has to be brought into this picture, right? There's so many memories from my training in emergency medicine in Philadelphia where there are nights when there's so many things going on, right? Gunshot wounds
Yeah.
and stab wounds and heart attacks and infections. And there are these moments where we pause, and it was very clear that we don't really know where we're going in the healthcare system, right? We're kind of running and we're putting out fires,
Right.
but where are we going in this health? What is health? It's a very simple question.
Right.
How do I get somewhere if I don't know what the destination looks like? How do I get somewhere if I don't know where I want to go? Right? If I make up a word like Bomley and I say I want to go to Bomley, what does it look like? What's the path? Who has been there? How long does it take? What resources do I need? You
Yeah.
can't answer those questions because we don't know what Bomley is. And that's kind of what health is now, right? What is health? What is human potential? What are we capable of? What is possible? If we cannot answer these questions, then healthcare is it's just a sound that we're making, echoing in a vast room, right? Until
Yeah.
we really define it and get comfortable with our ignorance and dive into it, then we can kind of map it out and say, we need to direct this ship somewhere, right? Otherwise, you just sail right over the destination and keep going because we don't know where we're going.
So, do you try to essentially cover how to treat the wounded person, or to avoid the wound altogether? I mean, where does it lead us in future?
All of it, right? We have to be able to engage at all levels of the spectrum. So, one is health as wholeness. What does it mean to be whole? Right? What does it mean to be a complete human being? What is possible? Then, if health is wholeness, then disease or dis-ease can be seen as a disintegration. When that integrated whole starts to disintegrate or starts to come apart, or where there are seams or tears in there, then this is disease. It's very clear in the case of a wound, right? If I have a laceration in the finger, there's a cut, there's a disintegration of the integrity of the skin. And
Right.
that the body knows how to reintegrate that. It sends the appropriate cells, it sends the appropriate factors to that area. And the body says, well, there's a disintegration here. We need to integrate this, right? When we look
Right.
at something like congestive heart failure, there's a disintegration in the functioning of the heart. One chamber of the heart is not coordinated with the other chamber of the heart, right? There's a disintegration. And what we try to do is reintegrate that somehow. So these kinds of views can come about only when we have a more complete view of ourselves. And
Right.
if we understand the human being as a flow of mind and body, at the very least, we have to start including mind in our anatomy. But when we start to include it that way, we will see that there are more ways to integrate the human system than only, let's say, surgery and medications. Surgery is another example of integration, right? There's something that is off kilter. We either
Yeah.
remove that or we repair that to again reintegrate the human body. So we need more mechanisms of reintegration. That is what healing is about, is reintegration. But to understand that, we again need a more complete view. As we develop this view, we will see new mechanisms of healing coming about. Because even when we're talking about something simple as a cut, we know that the state of our immune system matters. We know that the state of our mind can influence the state of the immune system. We know that a chronically stressed system is more susceptible to infection and chronic wounds than a system that is not stressed, a mind that is not inflamed. So once you start to create all of these parallels, you have a much more complete picture of the health and disease spectrum.
Right. And mind, like you mentioned, it's a powerful tool that we have. And we all know the effect of placebo and other things. And like you mentioned, it can even affect our immune system. So why? I mean, it may be just of my lack of awareness, but I don't really see much of the research going towards how we can trick our mind, or maybe train our mind to heal the diseases or the anything unfavorable that is happening to us. And you kind of delve into this topic, and you cover and bring out about I think three types of mind. So can you throw some light on that?
Yes. So first I'll say that we already know that mind has a role in this, right? We know the relationship between
Yeah.
mind and stress and disease and healing. So everybody is always doing this. This is a key aspect to understand, right? It doesn't matter if a person considers himself spiritual. It doesn't matter if a person is hardcore and they believe that they're only rational. It doesn't matter if they're philosophical. Everybody is using their mind and their body. And for everybody, the mind is influencing the body and the body is influencing the mind, right? This is, it doesn't, our beliefs are secondary to what we are. What we are is what we are, right?
Right.
So I can say that I believe I have 4 fingers, but I have 5 fingers here. And that's the way the body is operating. So similarly, everybody is using this mind and this body, both in healing and in disease. So the three minds model is a model that is comprehensive in that it goes beyond healthcare to describe fundamentally reality itself and what this world is. And the three minds model takes the view that the world fundamentally is mental in its experience, right? Or more fundamentally, I will say that the world is consciousness itself. And when I say consciousness here, we have to be careful. I don't mean my consciousness or your consciousness. I don't mean any individual's consciousness. I don't even mean being conscious of something in particular. I don't mean consciousness of this hand or consciousness of this state, or even being awake and consciousness, because there's dream consciousness. Even in sleep, there is some awareness happening. The cells are functioning. There is action and response happening. So there are all different categories of consciousness. When I say that the world is essentially consciousness, what I'm talking about is an undifferentiated, non-localized consciousness. And what we talk about as the grid of space and time is itself a differentiated aspect of this consciousness. So it is that kind of consciousness that I'm indicating when I say that the world is fundamentally consciousness. And let me say that this does not contradict any kind of scientific understanding. In fact, it is very much in line with latest scientific understandings about what the world is and what the objects that we see all around us are. So the three minds view says that when the mind is in a particular configuration, the world is experienced in a particular way. All right. So I'll say that again. When the mind is in a particular configuration, there are three configurations here: first, second, and third mind. In each of these configurations, everything we understand and believe about the world will be different.
Right.
Right? What the world is, what time is, what space is, what the goal of life is. Is there a goal of life? Right? What perception is, all of these, what love is, what fear is, everything changes. The view of all of these changes. What a lifetime is, where we have come from, where we are going, technology, what are the limits of technology, what is possible for the human being. All of this changes. And almost everything that is in popular culture now and popular science now that answer these questions, and popular religion and all of these, come from the first mind view. And what is the first mind view? The first mind view is the view in which we experience that what we are is a localized individual, right? When the experience is there that what I am is either this body or some localized entity that is in the body or around the body, when that is the experience of a person, then when you look around, you will see that the world is made of many, 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 many things, infinite number of things. It's made of ceilings and walls and bricks and wood and trees and people and thoughts and feelings and stones and past and present and future and stars and galaxies and on and on and on, endless things, right? When the identity is localized as an individual or as an individual thing, that boundary of identity, that localizing boundary, is superimposed on this ocean of non-local, undifferentiated consciousness, and is what is interpreted then as a world of infinite objects. Just like you might see the depths of an ocean, which is continuous and whole, expresses all the many activities at the surface of the ocean. Just as you see the vast air in the world, you can say there's only one air in a sense, right? All air doesn't stop at the border of the United States and say, oh no, that's another country's territory, right? There's only, we can say, one mass
Yeah.
of air in the world, but there are innumerable currents. There's a current here, there's a current there, there's a fast current, a slow current, and a big current. And that's what we
Yeah.
call wind, right? So innumerable different kinds of wind, but air is just one. So similarly, this undifferentiated nature appears as many, 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 many things when the sense of identity is localized. It's very particular to the localization of the sense of identity. And when the sense of identity localizes, basically the split happens. And we say everything on this side of the identity is me, and everything on that side of the boundary is the world or that. right? This is this, and that is that. Internal is this, external is that. Internal is here, external is there, right? So we create this experience of duality and ultimately multiplicity. We can go into much detail, but this is the essence of the first mind view. And it has dramatic implications for science, philosophy, for everything else, because this is generally the science that we have today is first mind science. Because what it says is that I am here and I want to know what that is over there, right? It doesn't ask how the I am here and that is over there came about. It takes as an assumption, I am here and that is over there. I want to know what that is. And then it goes on cutting that into smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller pieces, smaller and smaller and smaller pieces to know what that is. And ultimately, now we have reached the point with quantum science where we see that the very way in which we're looking, because we have made it so fine, so small, that even the way in which we're looking is influencing what we're seeing, right? And of course, this is a hint that there is a second mind, that what we are and what we are looking at are connected at some level. We are reaching that level with the fineness of our thinking and the fineness of our perception. And that eventually will take us to second mind science. So what is the second mind? The second mind then is this undifferentiated nature, right? It is this potential, we can say, that dances as the localizing perceiver, the localizing subject, you and me, and the world that we perceive, right? So there's this complementarity, this complementary relationship between me, the person who's looking at the world, and let's say right now, this camera that I'm looking at, right? And this, but how do these both come out? Because they are differentiated aspects of a second mind, of a undifferentiated nature. How do we know it's a mind? Why isn't it just a mathematical construct? Why don't we just call it space? Because this undifferentiated nature is experienceable by us, right? It is not something external to us. It is not something other than us. It is experienceable as our own nature. And its differentiation into subject and object is experienceable as our own nature. And that's not just me saying this. Pretty much every wisdom tradition has said this. Every indigenous culture has said this in some way. And our science is pointing to it too, although science has not yet said that is experienceable as our nature. That it hasn't said, but it does know that there may be some common unity from which all of this differentiates. So this is the second mind nature. We can think of the second mind as a dance. It's the dance between unity, duality, and multiplicity. It's a dance between our deeper nature and an entirely different understanding of what the universe is, of what life is, of what it feels like to be alive, right? Because as that second mind nature, the boundary of the first mind is seen through. As that boundary becomes translucent, the very experience of what it means to be human is different. The very idea of what is possible is different. The very idea of what health is and healing is different. So this is the second mind. So if this is the second mind, what is the third mind? The third mind is the purely undifferentiated nature, right? It is that in which there is no uprising of duality and multiplicity. So we can think of the second mind as this in-between state, this localizing, delocalizing state, whereas the third mind is simply the potential state. From this potential state, as identity begins to coalesce, we experience what is the second mind. That's experienced as vastness. The second mind is experienced as vastness. In traditions, they'll call it the ocean of light and so on. All of these terms start to come into view, which are all expressions of non-locality, of possibility, of the dance between differentiation and the undifferentiated nature. The crystallized, hardened, definite aspect is the first mind. This is the one where we look at the world and we say, yes, we know what it is. You know, it's this thing and that thing and that thing and that thing. So these three minds are three ranges of identity. And what they suggest ultimately is that what we call mind is not created by the brain. What we call mind is not created by the body. What we call mind is not dependent on the body. Certain expressions of mind are dependent on the body, yes. What we call mind does not begin with the body nor end with the body. What we call mind is not dependent on things, but there are many layers of mind, and the deepest layers of mind, the undifferentiated nature, is what I call consciousness, and that consciousness is what we call the universe.
That's great explanation. So I think this has been, as you mentioned, have been proven and said in various religions as well. I mean, Buddha getting enlightenment, maybe the same thing that you are saying. Also in popular culture, like in the movie Avengers, we have this planet. It has its own consciousness. I mean, it takes care of it, the beings there. It attracts people and does all sorts of things. Do you think we have a free will?
Yes. So let me speak to the first part first. This kind of deep recognition really can't be suppressed. It's going to come out somewhere. It's like if you try to hide an air bubble underwater, you can't keep it there. It's going to escape somewhere. It's going to find a way to
Right.
squeeze out and get outside,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
what is deeply true is going to find a way to express. And you see it in mythology, you see it in movies, you see it in books, you see it everywhere. You see it in music. These
Right.
themes are there everywhere, shown in different ways. Yes, in terms of free will is essentially an experience, right? Because what we're talking about is the experience of choice relative to an identity, right?
Right.
So question is, free will for whom? Is there free will for the first mind? Well, what is free will? Is there the experience of choice for the first mind? Yes, the experience of choice is there, right? Is there the experience of choice as the second mind? Yes, the experience of choice is there. In fact, what we experience as free will at the first mind level, in the first mind configuration of identity as individuals, is the flow of the second mind, right? Just like what is happening in the ocean is the influence of the collective waters of the ocean, right? The individual current within the ocean has the experience of its will as it's coursing. Of course, I don't mean literally, I'm just giving an example, right? The individual current has the experience of choice as it is moving along its course. And of course, that current is the result of the collective movement, right? It's embedded in the collective movement. So similarly, as the first mind, we have the experience of choice, that is our free will, and that is also the result and the flow of the second mind experienced locally. So free will is there at both levels. We can't say, well, the first mind, that's not really free will because it's determinism, because everything that's happening around is controlling it. Well, that assumes that our only identity is as a first mind. No, we also have the identity as the second mind. So as that identity broadens, we can say that, yes, it is our own will, our own choice, our own flow, our own way of being that represents itself through the individual first mind as its own choice. So at every level, that experience of creativity is there. That's ultimately what we're calling free will, is creative spontaneity, such that what I feel I can do, right? Isn't that free will?
Right.
Well, what does that mean? What I feel I can do? It's that creative spontaneity. It's the ability to create and choose. And that is there as the flow of the second mind, which is also our identity and filters down to the experience of free will.
Right. And uh, you have this second book of yours. I can see it in the background, right? Is this a dream? And you mentioned that we are conscious beings. I mean, even if we are sleeping, then there's an element of consciousness. Uh, I'm going to ask you a cheeky question, but uh, are we living in a matrix? Is that something do you think is going on, or that's not the case?
I think it's helpful to think about the Matrix, to think about the movie and see what the parallels are, right? I wouldn't say we are living in a matrix because from what I remember about the movie, at least, there are some
Yeah.
aspects of it that may not be as true. And I wouldn't say we are exactly like that matrix, but there is some truth to that model in the sense that what we are experiencing as this world of multiplicity is a representation. It is a representation of deeper currents of mind and deeper events of the mind. But we all have access to that. It's not that we are trapped as individuals, and it's not that somebody else can force us to stay as in this only view. Neither is it that we have to escape this view and destroy this view and get away from this view. None of these are true. It is simply that this is a view, right? So if you have a house with many windows and you keep on looking through one window, well, you're going to have an incomplete representation of what's going on, and our choices won't be as good. The whole lawn there might be destroyed, right? The back over there might be destroyed. There might be an amazing playground or forest over here, but I never see it because I'm just looking through one window. So similarly, when we just look through the first mind window, we're just missing out on a more complete picture that will help us to live a more fulfilling life, a life that works for us better. So the matrix view, the usefulness of it is to call into question, how much do we really know? How much are we really seeing? And how can I encounter this other view? And what can I do to get out of this? This is not about somebody else having power over me or keeping me in the matrix. That all happens with our own consent, right? But when we see that this is a choice rather than the only way to see things, then the view opens up.
Awesome. And now, are you practicing now, or have you devoted your full time to this journey that you're on?
Yes, still practicing emergency medicine.
Okay. And you are associated with this health revolution. Tell us about that. I mean, I want people to know there is option available, and there are things people are trying to sort of create awareness around. So
Yes.
I found out. I mean, it is quite interesting that what you have started off. Just tell us about that, if you can.
Yes. So health revolution comes from the awareness that healing is possible. And it basically programmatizes this awareness that healing is possible. Because what I've seen in my medical career is that so many of my patients do not believe that healing is possible. In fact, so many physicians do not believe that healing is possible, right? Most physicians don't know that we can reverse coronary artery disease, right? Which is the blockages in the heart that cause heart attacks, right? We're not taught that in medical school. That's not part of the curriculum in the cardiac curriculum, that coronary artery disease is reversible. But if you look at Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, Dr. Dean Ornish, and others, they've created protocols that are based on plant-based nutrition that reverse heart disease. And they have angiograms to show the reversal in heart disease, but you don't see the curriculum. So most people that have heart attacks don't know that there are options to reverse this. And they think that only stents and bypass and medications are the way to go. And those don't reverse it, of course. They simply try to halt it in its tracks, but it tends to progress anyway, right? So it's not just coronary artery disease. I've interviewed now people on the Healing is Possible podcast that have healed from Crohn's disease, that have had, that needed surgeries, that needed bowel resections, that had their symptoms go away with a simple exercise they did for a couple hours, right? It sounds like what we would call a miracle, but we need to go beyond this idea of miracles and just look at what are the actual mechanisms for healing, right? So every disease that you can think of, almost every disease you can think of that's considered fatal, somebody has recovered from, right? So we need to be more curious about this. We need to start sharing that healing is possible, especially when you consider the power of placebo, when you consider the power of the images that you show, when you consider the power of the stories that you tell. If you don't tell the story that healing is possible, which is based in fact, we have stories like this, but we are not promoting them. We're not sharing them. So everybody thinks, oh, well, it's not possible. It's not possible for me. So Health Revolution is spreading this idea, one, with this podcast, the Healing is Possible podcast, which is sharing stories of people who are healing from stuff you're not supposed to heal from, apparently, according to the books, right? And we look into how they did it, and we talk to other experts that are interested in this, who are trying to explain, how is this happening? How can we learn more about this? How can we make this happen in our lives? That's the podcast. And then we will be launching a live stream to take a closer look at these effects so we can all learn from each other together in a healing community to create what we call a healing space. Imagine having a space in society where everyone who comes to this space is aware that healing is possible, right? There's no space like that. There are so many people, well, we can't do this. Well, that's impossible. This is impossible. But who are we to say something is impossible if somebody else is doing it, or if somebody else has already done it, and we don't fully understand the human being and the human body and the human mind and the human spirit, then who are we to say it's impossible? No.
Right.
So we're creating a space on this live stream where we all meet weekly, where we share the awareness that healing is possible. And we look into some of these events and we'll see what happens. It's an experimental space. So these are two of our projects right now, the Healing is Possible podcast, which is launching in May, and the Healing live stream, which will be coming after that. And then there's some more programming in the works. But the idea is to show that healing is possible and to take the next step where healing becomes inevitable and healing is actually happening. So this is the gist of Health Revolution.
So what I understand is basically you are trying to remove all those boundaries and walls, like you mentioned earlier, that we have very constructive view of things. And if this is not possible, somebody has said it, so it is written in the books, that is being taught that this is not an irreversible disease or whatever. But you are trying to convey this message, the healing is possible. That's awesome. And how about the books? You any third book in the offing?
Probably will be one. Let's see. I want to start. Let's get this podcast going and the live stream, and then, we'll see what the need is, what needs to be clarified more, what message needs to be out there, and then we will work on that.
Awesome. And what about you personally? I mean, do you have a routine that you follow in your personal life related to health? Of course, any diet that you follow, any exercise regime? What is your view on that?
So when I finished my training in emergency medicine, I was all out of sorts because I was eating anything pretty much any time of the day because you're up through the night and it's just very haphazard. So my mind was clouded, my mind was not clear. And at that time I went to a plant-based diet. I'm vegetarian, vegan, and I found that the mind cleared up quite nicely, very quickly, in fact.
Okay.
So since then I've been vegetarian for the last 10 years or so. And I think now I will probably go back to being vegan because I just find that the mind is clearer and easier to work with across these ranges of identity, right? So in managing these ranges, the first, second, third mind range, remember what I said, in each range, the world is different, right? It's not only that the world appears different, right? From the three minds framework perspective, it's not only that it appears different, of course it appears, but it is different. It fundamentally changes because the world fundamentally is not an externality, is the view here, right? So you could say that's a lot of responsibility. To manage these ranges becomes very important, right? And that's why, in the Indian traditions or many of these contemplative traditions, they are removed to ashrams in the forest or in the mountain because they're fine-tuning their needs, right? The food is very particular, maybe minimal food, right? The kinds of interactions, the fresh air, right? Bare feet on the ground. These aren't just strange things that weird people do. These are techniques for grounding and balancing and insight. And those are the four engines, right? They're nutrition, movement, rest, and connection. And they're across mind and body. Nutrition, not just of the body, but nutrition, what we're taking in, what we understand, what we believe, right? Movement, not just, yes, of the body, of the range of motion, but movement of our creativity, movement of our suppressed emotions, right? Movement of our feelings.
Right.
Rest, not just resting the body, but also resting the mind. Connection, right? Connecting, of course, connecting with others, having that interflow, that interplay of relationship, but connecting with ourselves also, and connecting with the planet, which is what monks are doing when they're walking barefoot in the Himalayas, for example, right? It's like direct contact with the planet. So these four engines are universal, whether you're a monk or you're a scientist or you're a doctor or you're anybody, right? So these are the basics, and that's also what I try to practice. So I try to get outside with bare feet and walk in the lawn every day. I try to get contact with the sun every day. So the practices are the same everywhere. And when I made certain changes across these four engines, I find that it's much easier to navigate where I want to stay in terms of the range of identity for the work that I want to do in the world, for the way I'd like to relate in the world, and all of those things. So it's incredibly powerful to recognize that there is a choice like this, right? And it becomes easier the more of these things we start to do, starting with one step, it'll get a little bit easier and a little bit easier.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Dr. Anoop. I mean, it was quite enlightening for me, and I'm sure the audience would find a lot of value in what you had to say. And even your books are highly recommended by a lot of influential people. So I'm guessing they are quite good. And I'll definitely make an effort to read all of them. And I'm sure people might try to contact you after this. So how can they reach out to you?
The best way is through the website, healthrevolution.org, or we're on social media at Health Revol. So it's Health REVOL. So there's a contact form on the website or social media, and let's do this. Let's show the world that healing is possible and also how it is possible.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Anoop, for taking time out of your busy schedule and giving us this ball of knowledge. Thank you so much.
Thank you.